Hi, it's Janet Fitch, and it is noon on Wednesday, and that must mean that it is Writing Wednesday, where I answer your writing questions and have thoughts about writing life, man, God, and the universe. It all Writing is always about everything because the human being expresses him or herself, themselves, through the written word. It's So how could it not be about everything? I wanted to take a moment to talk about the weekend writing workshop I'll be teaching through the community of writers on the 9th, 10th, and 11th. It's a weekend intensive on writing on the senses. And this is your last day to get it at the discount, $50 discount, if you sign up before the 1st. So it is the 30th of September. And if you're interested in getting back in touch with the senses, I always start with the senses. I think writing should be embodied. It's probably my core recommendation to everyone. Hi, Jill. Is to start with the body, start with the senses, and work your way out from there. We're a body before we're a consciousness, almost. Hi, Brenda. So you can sign up at the communityofwriters.org. And sign-ups will continue, but you get the $50 break by signing up before tomorrow. And I'm still recovering from the debates last night. I say not quite recovered from the debates. Hi, Courtney. So, but hopefully you take notes. What does it look like when a blustery person is under pressure? What does it look like when a more a controlled person is under pressure? Mannerisms, facial expressions, vocal quality, certain tics, the way the mouth is formed. You can always take notes. Hi, Zunaid. I did a lot of post-debate rage donation, yes. I certainly did. But you can always take notes. Even a terrible situation has sense information. And, you can describe character. You can give somebody, some alcoholic uncle those gestures, those characteristics. When you have two people on, or three, really, there was a pathetic moderator as well, you can sit and capture gesture, facial expression, body language, tone of voice, type of vocabulary, the broken overlay of two people talking, people who don't even complete a sentence. They spout phrases that have no verb. They don't mean anything because they're just, it's supposed to mean, so you're supposed to already know what that means. So very, very much a lot of information in that debate, whether or not, even if you didn't really listen to what they were saying. We were. So so anyway, I did want to say, if you're interested in taking that sense class on the weekend of the 9th, 10th, and 11th, this is your last day for the $50 discount. Communityofwriters.org. Today, I thought we would talk about plot and scene, and how do you know what to write next. I got a wonderful question in my email. You can always email me. Hi, Ruthie. You get it at janetfitchwrites.com. It's my website. Through the website, you can always contact me if you don't want to just put questions in the comments here. If you want to think more about them, send them to me through my website. I love having a good question to sink my teeth into. And Brenda today, this was a really juicy question. So she writes, is there one best way to draft a new scene? If you have time, I'd love advice on how to approach the new scene. I try several ways, none seems optimal, except for the ones that you already can picture, which happens maybe once or twice in a book, right? I've tried to think through plot points ahead of time, but find it constrains my imagination and ability to develop surprises and plot twists. I've also tried diving in with a vague idea of where I'm going, which often leads to writing and then tossing out dozens of pages before I end up with a scene I'm happy with. Time-consuming and frustrating since I've got a day job. In case it makes a difference, I write. She's writing historical thrillers, so she generally does have a overall idea of where the book is going. But getting there in a surprising way is proving so difficult. Okay, so the question is, what do I write next? What's the next scene? This is every writer's problem. Every writer, unless they have outlined chapter by chapter, scene by scene, in those index card things that I tried once, in the dinosaur age, and discovered that didn't work for me, because once I knew what the book was going to do scene by scene, I didn't want to write it. I was bored. I was sick of it by that time. The discovery to me is most of my interest in writing fiction. So this is something that I suffer from. Most people suffer from this. This is called writing, where you don't know what comes next, and you try this and it's no good, and you try that and it's no good, and you keep throwing stuff out, and it's very time consuming. It's very frustrating. It makes us want to just write fully outlined, like, genre fiction, so we don't have to deal with the uncertainty. What do I write next? And I am just like you. I'm writing a new book. I had a really good chapter. It ended, just punched you right in the face. It was wonderful, if I may say so. Every once in a while you recognize that you've written something wonderful. And then I could not get the next scene. Could not. I made a list of the things that probably should be happening in the next several chapters. And it's like I didn't want to write any of them. It all seemed very business, taking care of the business of the plot. But I wasn't attracted to, they all seem really dull. And if anybody has seen that wonderful Deanna Vreeland film called The Eye Has to Travel, she was a kind of a monumental figure in publishing. She was the editor of Vogue and Harper's Bazaar. First Bazaar, then Vogue. And just a quintessential character in publishing and in design and fashion. And a wonderful character. These eccentric people. And she was just sort of like Peggy Guggenheim. She was so out there. And what she would tell the people that she supervised at the magazine, she'd say, don't be boring. It's like the worst thing you could do is be boring. Don't bore them. You tell them, give them what they don't know they want yet. I recommend that to everybody. That what a great movie, and you know, don't be boring. So here I am getting ready to write the next scene after my fabulous scene, um, and everything I could think of was boring. It bored me. That was why I couldn't write them. Because when I would start, I'm just like, this is so boring. What do I want? So, how do you write the next scene? Well, contrast. So, if you've had a bunch of scenes with certain people, you know, maybe your protagonist and the antagonist, and there have been a couple of those scenes, you don't want a third one with the duet with the two people. You either want to go for that your protagonist was somebody completely different, that then the upshot of that scene will play back into the central situation, or you want more than one person, more than those two people in the scene. I was doing one person scene, you know, a lot of mulling, and I just didn't like it. Now, luckily, I have a writer's group, and so I highly, you know, recommend having that writer's group, having some different eyes, different opinions, who are familiar with not only with your book in general, but familiar with where you are in the book. They've been following the course of action, and there's somebody in there who is you know, these are all writers that I respect. You know, don't be in a writer's group with people you don't respect, because what are you going to get out of that? Nothing. And this person said you need at least like a 3-person scene with some conflict. And she looked at my list and had said, you know, this one looks interesting to me. I needed my scenes before that are very definitely located in a house. The main action is a familial story, and the family home becomes the center stage of the conflicts in the story. So I could see that getting out of the house was going to be essential. The question was, do I have my antagonist in the scene or not? I decided not. She'd been in the scenes the last 2, and she actually got a scene of her own, a point of view scene. Enough of her. Let's get out of the house. And so I looked at the one scene that got her out, away from the house, with some other characters that I had developed earlier. So picking up a thread. So things that help with deciding what to do next are to think about the different locales and number of people. What scenes are coming up that you can see? How many people, day, night, indoor, outdoor, where are they located? And then think of the scene, and you might start not knowing what the heck you're doing. You just start. But at some point, you stop, or at least this is what I do, is I stop and I go, what do I want out of this scene? How is this going to change? You know, we talked about what is a scene. It's a movement from one state to another state within the character. Something happens where they cannot go back to the way it was before. So if you have a character who is developing courage, say, how is this scene going to affect that development? Is there going to be a setback? Are they going to get a new inspiration? They're going to see something they didn't see before. They're going to react in a way that they never would have reacted before, but they're pressed to it in this scene. So that is super helpful, to ask yourself, what do I want out of this scene, especially if it's a dialogue scene like this one is. It's a dialogue, 3-person dialogue scene. And it's going along snappy snap, but they can just go on. Anybody who's been to a party knows that you can have all kinds of dialogue, and you come home and you had a good schmooze, but nothing necessarily happened. So you have to ask yourself, what do I want from this scene? What do I want my character to get out of this scene? How is it going to change them? And then making sure that the scene does it. The other thing you have to remember about when you're designing scenes is it's like, I don't know if anybody's gone through like college stuff with their kids or school stuff where you're picking a school or a camp or, all that stuff. But you get to a certain point where you realize there is no right answer. That there's going to be a number of right answers. So stop looking for the right thing to do next. Look for the thing that makes a movement different than the one that preceded it, or the ones coupled back that preceded it. Make a new move. It keeps you fresh. It keeps the reader fresh. I haven't done this before. Or look for a theme that you dropped earlier. Say you had a secondary plot in the courage story. Say the main story is gathering the courage to leave one's spouse. Say it's a guy who's trying to get it together to leave his wife. A courage scene. And maybe early on he'd had a scene with an old college roommate who maybe was happily married. And so that adds to the conflict, right? And then you have the wrangle with the wife and whatever is going on with him in other parts of the story. Now I got a big fight with the wife that I picked the fight, my character picked the fight with. And where do I go next? Do I want him wandering around the city thinking about his problems? Do I want him picking up on some random woman? Do I want him, but say I want to pick back up on those people, that guy, the happily married guy. So I think, I could have them go playing golf, him and Ernie playing golf, maybe a foursome. So maybe 3 married people, 1 single person. And they can have a conversation about marriage. He can talk to that one guy about, loyalty is an issue or something like that. And maybe hear something surprising that gives another aspect of the issue to the book. So that's, I've got to say that that there is no way around that pile of rejected stuff, because when you go to buy clothes, you need a really great article of clothing, say, a new pair of boots or something. You do have to try on some boots. There's no way around it, unless you're having somebody make boots for you. You're going to have to try some on. So, the fact that you have to throw out dozens of pages, notice your feelings. I would try this, try that, and I would be writing like 6 pages, maybe 10 pages. I'd never got into full long chapters and then throw them out. But, I'd start stuff, 6 pages, and going like, not, it has no lift. Writing is so much about crawling along on your gut feeling. And if you tend to be somebody who tends to nausea, I do, I feel when things aren't working, I feel it as a sort of nausea. And so I'll be working on this and just think that nausea is not letting up. I just don't like it. Throw it out, throw it out, throw it out. And then what happens is I started working on something, a scene where she gets out of the house, she's driving, she's going into a nightlife area of the city where we haven't been yet. And she meets up with somebody that we've been exposed to before, but we've never actually had an encounter with. So it's a fresh encounter about something I've already laid the groundwork for. And I've wanted to have a scene with these people. And now I have a chance. It's a 3-person scene. It's in a new location. It's putting pressure on the issues that she is struggling with throughout. And it's actually putting her on the other side of an issue that she has so far kind of supported one view against this another view of life, and she'd always defended this one. Well, in this scene, she meets somebody who's even more like that than she is, and she finds herself on the other side. So that reversal is what it's going to be about, and very interesting to me as a writer. So there is absolutely no way around this throwing out of scenes, because you have to try on those clothes. You want a really great looking dress for the prom, you're going to have to try on a few, and see how it goes. I could not have done this from an rational, intellectual thinking about things and tossing them, until I try it. I'm not that abstract. I'm sort of a peasant. I've got to handle things. Like, I can't, if I want to show you something, like how to do something, I can't just describe it. I always have to have my hands in it. And the same thing with this difficulty of scenes. So no, you are not the only person who tries multiple scenes, and you cannot not do that. But always make a little list, just like with exercises that I've recommended. Make a little list of the scenes that you see that you're going to be writing, and see what seems to be a good follow-up to the one you just finished. And definitely, if you have people you trust and you are banging your head against a wall because you're just not coming up with anything that pleases you, tell them what your problem is and say, what would you like to see, this or this, and it's like, yeah, I would like to not that. I do not want to see another driving around thinking about my problem scene. So, yeah, Ruthie, and she's been writing. Critique groups are great. My old writing teacher, Kate Braverman, always said, there's no such thing as a permanent state of grace, which means that when you have a particularly good scene, when you've done something right, a really good, hi Nadia, you have a really good chapter, you will struggle to get the next one going. It'll never be fabulousness after fabulousness in writing. You always, the better the scene that you just finished, the harder it is to get the next one. So expect that. What else can I answer you? Let's see. And even if you do outlines, you might get to a scene that you just boring, and you try to make it interesting, and it just isn't It isn't interesting you. It's not exciting you. You might have to pitch it and try something else. So outlining is no sure bet to keep you from problems. Yeah, so Sayward says, I've had the same issue this week. I'm 25,000 words in, which is, I don't even know what that is, 50 pages? Something like that, 100 pages? Find herself stuck. I'm taking time away for a few days. Time away can be helpful. It can also just build up resistance. So I don't know which is better. Sometimes just taking half an hour and writing that little list of possibilities and look at what you've already had. So make a little list of your last 5 chapters and what you did and what the emotional movement was and who was in them and where they were. And then make your little list of things that you see are going to happen. She's going to have a confrontation with Tom. She's going to have to, have a loan application, rejected. Whatever you see plot-wise, you're going to have. And then see what is a nice run. Also, people don't always have to write in chronological order. So if you have a scene that you can see really clearly, but you can't see how you're going to get to it or set it up, just write it. Just write it, and you'll figure out later how to knit it into the work. Sometimes taking a break is helpful. Sometimes doing an exercise. Sense exercises are great for that. And Zunaid says, British novelist and screenwriter Ronald Harwood said, always stop when it's going well. Yeah, Twain did that too. Stop while it's still happening. That's good advice. Sometimes it's hard to do, especially if you're the kind of person who eats the whole chocolate bar. My husband can take a square of the chocolate bar, and put the rest away. And I'm like, what? So it depends on what kind of person you are. But yeah, that's supposed to be a very good idea. And I do, let's see. Yeah, Hemingway. That's what I'm thinking of. But yeah, there's no easy way of this. It's more, if you have plot twists, if you're writing more of a conventional mystery, you kind of know you have to mislead your readership in this direction so that there will be a twist. If they expect it too soon, then you're not going to surprise anybody with your twist. So that helps you plot it out. So what else can I tell you about plot and plotting? I certainly will write a scene out of order and just have the scene put in a box. And then later, when you are trying to figure out how everything fits together, you'll just take all those scenes and put them in some sort of order. What else can I tell you? Tips on revising a whole memoir or novel, Courtney is asking. Oh, well, by the time you have a whole novel, you will have revised it a godzillion times, because you revise as you go, right? You're going back and you go forward, you go back and you go forward, back and forward, and then you get to the end of the draft and you go back to the beginning again. And I tend to have different drafts, there's just the struggle through to what the heck happens. That's the first draft. Second draft is making things more subtle, seeing connections between things, deepening things, cleaning up the dialogue, dialogue pass. There might be a sense pass where you're just going through and heightening the senses, making sure that you're really in the body of the character. And then the last draft is usually the language draft, and making sure that is that the best verb? Is that the best metaphor? Can I say something more about this, something more insightful? Can I go up to the next step of what things mean? Can I talk about what, I see something and I've got the sense description and stuff, but can I take the next step and tell us what it means about the world? Consider what I've already written. So those are sort of the kind of layers of drafts, of revision that I would go through. Kimberly says, I find what I'm reading highly influences my writing. Do I carefully choose what to read while working on a book? Yeah. I am always looking. Well, I'm always writing a book, right? That's my life. But I'm always looking to see what feeds it, what feeds me, and what isn't just consuming a bag of Doritos. And looking for flavors that in some way excite me. Form, language, especially audiobooks should have language because it's going right into your head like music. I'm always kind of listening to myself. As writers, we're always noticing how we're reacting to things. Like, that's half of it. So I don't mind the influence because it usually dissolves in a few days after you're done. It just becomes a little inflection in the book, and no one will know why that flavor is in that chapter. But it takes on the flavor of what you were reading. Some people are just fanatical about resisting any influence in their work. I think it makes it interesting. I don't have a problem with it. And then the Zunaid says there's cause and effect, but then there's also cutting to a completely different character section, which needs time and will intersect with the central plot later. This is where visual storytelling helps, being indoors and then cutting to the out, moving to the out. Yeah, just varying is always being surprised. Don't be boring. If you can imagine what 99 out of 100 people would expect to come next, don't do it. Do something completely different. You're always, it's like you're constructing a little roller coaster for your readership, and you want to have some movement, where there's some big changes so that they can enjoy the way it changes up. So this is excellent. So you vary up a talky scene with some action, an action scene. Yeah, definitely. So changing things up. Let's see, what else do I have? So I, there's all these looking for, this is what I call like composing in a symphonic way. You're looking for how it feels to be on that ride that you're creating. I think that there's all kinds of people have theories of plot and when you should do what and stuff, and I just For me, it's like that I'm a very emotional reader and a very emotional writer, and I want to see those emotions change. And then there's a quiet stretch, and then boom, you know. Um, so it's more like that, or more music, more like music, symphonic music, which has big changes to it. Anything else I can? Question on the transformational journey, Kimberly says. Where in a story early on the protagonist is unaware of her issues? Yes. We should never have a character aware of their issues to begin with, because, people have it's like, don't send your character to the therapist. Let them grope towards their, their problem. If they know what their problem is, you're already kind of pulling your punches. Let your character struggle that way. So it's what keeps the reader from putting it down. Her awareness comes later in the book, because the protagonist isn't getting the obvious early on, like how dumb can she be? Yeah, I love a character who's impulsive. I love a character who is very confident, like Marina in the Russian books. Very confident. She always knows what she thinks. And she can be so wrong and have, the readers like, don't be so dumb. But she's a young person, and she's sure that she knows what she's up to. I have an older person in the book that I'm working on now who it takes some surprising events or confrontations for her to get a look at herself. But she's much more able to do that than a younger person. So it's a more subtle book. It's not the Russian Revolution, it's a little bit more on the personal level. Zunaid says, I've been thinking about what you thought about the story in the Korean movie Parasite. Well, there was no protagonist in that. It was a familial story. I thought I didn't love it as much as many people did. It's ended up kind of as a societal critique with a lot of melodrama. But it was very interesting. I mean, I enjoyed it. Brenda asks, do you have a way you keep track of your minor characters and plot threads? I used Scrivener to draft, but haven't explored all its tools. I keep hearing people talk about keeping a book Bible to refer back to. I will show you what it looks like on my computer. All right, here's the new book. Here's the new book. I'm going to turn this around, and hopefully it doesn't reverse it. We'll see. All right, so this is my Scrivener. So these are my chapters, and then all of the research comes over here. And I have all of my characters. I have locations that I've used. These are photographs, but I also have like who everybody is. Let's see if I can show you this. Okay, characters. So main characters, who they are, first husband, second husband, people from her past, people from the town, other people, and I just keep it under characters. So I remember who everybody is. Super important. It also gives you some idea of maybe, have I used them recently? I'll also do a timeline. Let's see if I can find a timeline to show you. I have a maps of book timeline. Okay, see that? Book timeline. So that's chapter by chapter. Who's in the, what day is it? Day 1, day 2. Who's in the chapter? Whose point of view? What happens? Just so I can keep track. So day 5. Well, when is that? When is that? So yes, I keep track. I keep track. Oops, sorry. I keep track of a timeline of all the chapters, so I know what happens in each chapter, each scene in each chapter, who's in them, and what the emotional movement is, and also chronology. You know, how was it a week between those two things or a day? Important to remember, because the reader is getting that information, and if you forget it, you're going to make a big mess. So yeah, I do that on Scrivener, and I don't use Scrivener past the first draft for the writing because it's hard to export them, and you have to put it in Word, and by the time you do that, you might as well just be in Word. So the first draft will be like you see on Scrivener, but I always keep the research and the timelines and who the characters are and their pictures and, you know, their little bios and stuff on Scrivener, so I can always toggle back and find what I'm looking for, because Scrivener's always open. Brenda says I'm not that organized. I'm not that organized, which is why I have to do this. You know, I'm sure if I was more organized, I wouldn't have to be making a list, but I'm going like, now, when was that? What was that? So I know that if I don't keep track of it, I'm just going to make a huge mess. The other thing that's really important as far as organization goes is not to keep multiple drafts of the same thing in your kind of active file. Decide which version of that scene with Peter you want to use and work on, and get rid of that title, like Peter buys a car. Maybe that's the title for the file. Peter buys a car, and you have like 50 versions of Peter drives a car. Let me tell you, when you are compiling your book and you don't know which of those scenes is the one that's the most, that you've actually done the latest revisions on, it's going to be a nightmare. So call the most recent one, the one you're working on, Peter buys a car, and then take all the other Peter buys a car and put old, or, you know, draft 1, draft 2, draft 3, if you like to keep them, but get them out of your chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. Get them into a different area so you don't have a nightmare when it comes to compiling. That's a mess. Megan says, I have a problem where early on I wrote a phone call scene to facilitate a plot point which leads to the character traveling. But I know this is bad. I haven't been able to fix it. Don't want to replot the last third of my book. Phone call scenes are almost always bad. I don't see that that's the case. You know, a phone call, just make sure they're embodied. Make sure the character is physically somewhere on that phone call. Let them imagine what's on the other end. Let them hear and notice things. You know, make sure that you use all the tools. I don't have a trouble with a phone call scene. Just make it interesting, visually interesting, not just dramatically interesting. Like, embody it, use the senses. So let's see what else we have. Yeah, don't twist yourself in knots trying to solve a phone call scene. There's no such thing as a bad scene. There's only a boring scene. So don't be boring. Sayward says, in the novel I just finished, my character is aware of her issues, but resistant to change, so that keeps the conflict up. Worried about having her in therapy. Ugh. Yeah, I don't like having characters in therapy. It seems like the best choice for the story. I don't like it myself, but you know your story. I tend to cut, my writers group, everybody knows that I will cut people's therapists out of their story when I see pages with where they run to the therapist and the therapist tells them things. It's like, I don't want, unless the therapist is like Dr. Jacoby in Twin Peaks, unless they're like nuts and are giving them terrible advice, then they can stay. Yeah, you shouldn't never have a shortcut to insight. The character needs to work that one. And everybody's resistant to change. That's good. But when they struggle towards something hand over hand, that's what's really interesting. And non-therapized people are more extreme, and that's more interesting on the page. You want to go to therapy, you want to deal with your issues, but your character should suffer more. Okay, Zunaid says, I appreciate your notes on the difference between fiction and visual storytelling. Yeah. My critique group wants it up front, otherwise they're not sure what they want to follow. What are some of your favorite stories in cinema and series someday? All right, we can talk about that. In your printed work on the side of the computer, there are sections all in caps. Is that part of the draft manuscript? Characters in caps on the side. No, that's just usually chapter title. This one week I'll put it in caps, and the next chapter I'll put in upper and lower. There's no consistency. It's just whatever I was doing that day. And I don't change it and this is not for public consumption. This is just for me to look at and go, oh yeah, chapter spaceships, chapter, Monique. Just for me. Although I like to keep the chapter titles. I really love chapter titles. You'll see all my books have chapter titles. And it's just usually the file title. But it helps me remember. It's like, where's that scene with Monique? Oh yeah, Monique is the chapter title. Yeah, I don't use Scrivener's compiling tool. I don't care about that. It's not as flexible as it needs to be, but the way you can handle the research and the incidentals about like all the chapter, what's in every chapter, and the timeline, and the character list of cast of characters, because you always forget, like, what did I call that guy? What's the friend's husband's name again? I can just go back to the character list and, oh yeah, Hector. Okay, got it. Reversions. Working on a play, found myself wasting time going through drafts to figure out which was which. Yeah, definitely get them out of there. Once you've superseded one version with another version, get rid of the other ones. I have a friend who's compiling a novel, and every time she has to print out for other people to see it, print out the whole book, she's having it, she'll have a nightmare of multiple drafts, multiple versions of the same. And sometimes she'll forget which one she's working on, and she'll revise this one for a certain thing and then realize that there's a newer version. So she's repairing something that is actually not as current. But then it'll show up as current because she's opened it and worked on it. So it's like, only work on one version have one version at a time, and the rest can be, you can call them outtakes, you can call them old, not this one, in the title. I've heard writers say it's bad and uncreative. That's the phone scene. I don't have a problem with phone scene. Just keep it interesting. Be physically in the character who is talking on the phone, so the world still exists. They still have thoughts. They hear things, and then they see something in their own world that could contrast with it, could, have something to say about, in a subtle way about the issue that they're discussing. And then something changes. It's not just informational. We have a phone call saying, oh, there's been something happened, and, boyfriend's been in an accident. You have to have the whole emotional experience of getting that information, and conflict in the scene, because the phone, anytime people are speaking, that's conflict. So you have to make it if it's bad and uncreative, that's not good, but it shouldn't be. It should be just as dramatic as a real-time face-to-face scene. Envy your writers group. I'm in a very remote area with few serious writers. It doesn't matter, because Brenda's saying, because we meet, we don't meet either, especially now. It's all Zoom. So the thing is to develop a relationship with other writers. If you do a writers conference, or you do a writers group, or some class, make sure you get people's info, the people that you think are really insightful, and continue to know them. And you can meet once a week on Zoom and email each other the work, or just read it out loud is what we do, and email each other copies. So there, with technology, there is no distance anymore. So it really favors people who live in a remote area. You don't have to just look around at the guy up the road. There's only 700 people in town, and none of them are writers. What am I going to do? You have the whole world now, and you can talk to people immediately. So that's a fabulous thing. So, when you engage, when you go to a conference, when you take a class online, just keep contact with people. Let's see. The Sayward says she never speaks directly to the therapist in the narrative, just tells the reader what the therapist has suggested and says, F that. Did you get tired of that? It's like Mommy says, I don't know. It doesn't sound very dramatic to me. It sounds kind of like you're taking the corners off of your story. Consider that. How do you move your manuscript from Scrivener to Word? I copy and paste. I'll just copy and paste. And then once I'm in Word, for the second draft, I just use Word. And I have Scrivener too. There is a Writing Wednesday, 2 Writing Wednesdays about Scrivener. I have a student, April Davila, ex-student, wonderful writer, who is sort of like a maven, Scrivener maven, and we're on together, and she talks a lot about it. So there are 2 Writing Wednesdays on Scrivener. I think they're both on YouTube if you can't find them here, and very useful. Yeah, I have exported, but I just cut and paste and make a new chapter in Word, and eventually I'll just have the whole thing in Word. Why, in your opinion, why some writers do not use chapter titles at all? Do you ever use a title to inform the chapter? Oh yeah. it's an old-fashioned thing to do, title your chapters, but it helps. I mean, I just do it because it's convenient for me, and it helps me remember what's in that chapter, whereas chapter 12 just means nothing. And writers, everybody has their own taste, their own aesthetics. Many people wouldn't want to tell the reader ahead of time anything about the chapter. You just have to be there. It's giving too much away. I think that's one of the reasons people don't do it. So Say Words, it's all email and Zoom, her writing group. Do you believe every novel needs to answer an overreaching question? Should we be asking ourselves, what is the reason for this novel? Not at the beginning, but as you go along, it really helps to refine your idea of what the heck is this about, is usually the way I phrase it to myself. What the hell is this about? And that I might use that for a chapter. It's like, what the heck was this about? It helps you refine it and know to kind of shape where the hills and valleys are, and what is it about. And often, if you have something that just doesn't feed the book, it's important to know eventually what the book is about. And it always needs to speak to something. That's meaning. Like, what's the meaning of this? I think maybe that's a difference between the kind of books that I write and maybe something that's more entertainment. Is perhaps entertainments don't have to be about anything, but revenge or jealousy or whatever. But literary fiction is always, you want to know what the heck is this really about, and it can be about many things. My Russian Revolution books, the Marina books, what are those about? And there's a coming of age, there's a, political, what is a revolution? How does revolution change as it goes along? What is power? How does it feel to be in a world that changes so quickly? Who do you believe? What do you believe? Is it important to believe something? What happens if what you believe and what you see around you are two different things? How do you deal with the dichotomy? Also about love and a passion, and who do you trust, and loyalty and betrayal. It was about a lot of stuff. And they start to bleed together. There's personal betrayal and there's political betrayal. And, they started to mesh as well. But it's never bad to ask yourself, what the heck is this about? So Roberta's writing group started in a class, and then they began to meet after the class, and then now they're meeting virtually. I'm going to try to make sure when I'm teaching this class on the 9th, 10th, and 11th, the sense class, to make sure there's time to get to know each other a little bit, or in smaller breakout groups, so that people could maybe grab somebody to exchange work with. Has the digital tablet or iPad changed my process? I don't have one. I have this very well-worn little tiny computer like this, and that's, that I've worn to shreds. And I have I have a smartphone. Obviously, I'm doing this from my phone. And so I don't have the digital tablet, but I assume the digital tablet will eventually replace the laptop computer. I'm almost sure of it. There'll, in the future, there will only be tablets. I don't think there'll be laptops forever. How do you recognize when you've grown past your critique group? That's a really good question. Now, I have, if I grew past my critique group, I would be looking for another critique group. And usually I find I tend to organize a critique group out of people that I want to work with. Rather than joining a group already in progress, it's usually easier to get people and start something anew. I have been in groups that I have outgrown. And when you find yourself teaching more than you are getting information, you've outgrown that group. When you find the critique that you're getting is just too simplistic, it's not rich enough, the people aren't writing on the same level of seriousness that you are, they're not reading as deeply as you are, then, you're getting restless, you're getting pissed off, you leave the group just angry that you spent that time and let people who aren't that acute look at your stuff. Getting bad advice from people who aren't that dedicated or deep as thinkers and writers. You can tell when you've outgrown that group. So that's when you might want to think about forming your own. And then if you formed your own and you find people you're growing, it's like, when do you know that your marriage is over? You find yourself restless, you're straining against, you've grown, they haven't. And it's just not feeding you anymore. And you're just being honest. I mean, some people really like a crit group as a social group. And there's nothing wrong with that. Unless you're a really serious writer. In which case, you're not there to socialize. I mean, I socialize with my writers group. I mean, these people are my brothers and sisters. But they are, first and foremost, my colleagues. Irreplaceable as colleagues. And sometimes, somebody will leave or you add somebody. That's an interesting shift when things get very stale. If you've been working with the same people for a long time, and you notice the crit is kind of going flat, to add a new person who is a really serious, good reader, good crit, will enliven the whole thing all over again. You can't do that with your marriage. Oh, that's fun. Yes. Oh, Brenda says, on groups, I tried a local one and the leader insisted on feedback could only be positive. That can be very interesting. But if it doesn't suit your needs, there might be somebody in that group who also it doesn't suit their needs. And you can go off and start something on your own. I'm a great one for starting from scratch. Ruthie's been married more than once. Very good. So anyway, I want to say again, if you're interested in taking the Sense class on the 9th, this is the last day to get it on the discount. So communityofwriters.org, Writing from the Senses. And it's going to be fun. It's fun to figure out how to teach something as visceral as Writing from the Senses virtually. So I'm really going to pay attention to that. And I hope you have a good wish you good writing, and definitely send me any questions you have for next week, and have a good week. Okay, thanks. Bye.